Hello and welcome back to another KCC video. I'm Rob and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping back into some ProRevenge archives. Our first story today comes to us from a deleted account, Duplex Destruction. Let's jump right in. A little over a year ago, I moved to a smallish town. I found a decent duplex on the outskirts, plenty of room for just myself. When I spoke to the landlord, or landlady I guess, she had implied that she'd had quite a few other people look at the place, but that these weren't the sort of people she wanted moving in. It was heavily implied, though never explicitly stated, that she wouldn't allow minorities to move into her duplexes. I really didn't care, as it was none of my business, and as long as I could get the place, I was happy. So I moved in a week later, and at first all was well. I work Tuesday through Saturday 8 to 5 every week, though I frequently get off later than 5. My job consists of driving a company truck and going to customers' houses to fix their crap. I sometimes deal with as many as 10 different people a day. At the end of the day, the only thing I usually want to do is go home and veg out in front of my computer. The last thing I want to do is interact with other people or have to deal with a bunch of noise. Unfortunately, my neighbor was running her own daycare next door, watching as many as 10 or 12 kids in her little 1,000 square foot unit. She would allow these kids to run wild. My typical Monday, which was one of my weekend days, would consist of waking up at about 7 a.m. to the sounds of kids banging on the walls and jumping on furniture and hearing my neighbor scream at the top of her lungs. This would go on all day until about 7 p.m. with no respite. Now, I knew when I moved in that she ran her own small daycare, but I didn't think it would be a problem. After all, I used to watch kids as well, only I was good at it, and I made sure the kids I watched were well behaved. Naturally, I assumed that someone running their own daycare would have the skills to control the kids. Not so. After a few weeks of this, I ended up losing my patience. I knocked on my neighbor's door and engaged her in small talk. I didn't want to immediately tell her to shut the F up, so I just made it seem like a friendly chat. During the small talk, I realized that this bee was nuts. This was the first time we'd ever talked, and within just a few minutes, she was telling me that she had an STD. I quickly forgot her name, but I always refer to her by the nickname I gave her, Crotch Rot. Well, after a few minutes of conversation with Crotch Rot, I decided to broach the subject of excessive noise. I started out by asking her if I was noisy, and assuring her that if I ever became noisy, she could ask and I would quiet down. She assured me that she never heard a peep from me. She then asked me if she was noisy, to which I replied that there was an awful lot of noise during the day while she was watching kids. Now, I'm still trying to keep things civil and friendly, but things are starting to go off the rails. She apologizes and tells me that running a daycare is a noisy business. She explains that this is her only source of income, and she has no choice in the matter. I ask her if she's able to keep the kids from banging on the walls at the very least, to which she replies that she's one person with 10 kids, and she can't be everywhere at once. At this point, I realize that being Mr. Nice Guy isn't working. This filthy bee is just going to keep making excuses and avoiding the issue rather than actually trying to do something about it. I suggest that she either hire on some help or take some lessons to learn to better deal with young children. She suggests I move somewhere else, and that it was stupid to move in when I knew the next door unit was a daycare. Well, at this point, I'm just pissed. This bee does a crappy job of running a daycare and handling children and has the nerve to call me stupid. I decide to go to war. Before going back into my own unit, I make one more statement. Do you have a license to run a daycare? Well, it turns out that Crotch Rot is good friends with Landlady, and at the beginning of the next month when Landlady comes to collect rent, she serves me an eviction notice, giving me 30 days to leave. Her explanation is that I'm causing tensions among the other tenants and being a troublemaker. Keep in mind, the only other tenant I've spoken to has been Crotch Rot. Well, neither of these bees know who they're effing with. I'm the last person to just bend over, especially when I feel that something unjust has been done. I do my research and learn about my state's childcare laws. I learn that there is a limit to how many children an unlicensed facility can care for, which is also based on how many caregivers there are. I also learned that there are certain requirements, such as state workers inspecting the facilities and doing background checks on the caregivers. All of that licensing information is public domain, so I do a search, and sure enough, my neighbor is unlicensed and illegally watching children. After that, I do some research on housing equality laws in my state. Turns out it's illegal for anyone, even a private owner, to discriminate against potential tenants on things like race, sex, religion, etc. First things first, I call up the Department of Child Protective Services and report my neighbor. I explain that she's unlicensed, that she's clearly unable to handle the children she's watching, and that I frequently hear banging and yelling coming from her unit, which has me concerned for the safety and well-being of the children. A bit of a fib there, but I figured I should spice it up a bit. Well, much to my surprise, it only takes about an hour before 2 CPS agents and a couple of police are pulling up in front of the duplex. They force Crotchrot to call each of the parents to come pick up their children, then explain to the parents that if something were to happen to their children, that they could be held liable for leaving their children with someone who isn't equipped to handle them. Crotchrot ends up getting slapped with a hefty fine and an order to appear in court. For the first time since I moved into that duplex, I was happy for the thin walls. I just sat there drinking a few beers and listening to all the chaos. It went on for hours. I slept like a baby that night. So, phase 1 of Operation Duplex Destruction was complete. Crotchrot was ruined. I destroyed her only source of income permanently, caused her financial distress in the form of a fine, and got her in trouble with the law. It was time to proceed to phase 2. By now, most of my stuff was packed and I'd found a new place to live a few miles down the street. A couple weeks after moving to my new place, I invited a few of my coworkers over to have a few beers, though I had ulterior motives. It just so happens that I invited 2 black coworkers and a white coworker. After we'd had a couple of beers, I explained the real reason I wanted to get together. I'd been working on a plan to get back at some racist C of a landlady, and I was ready to put the plan into action. Fortunately, me being such a likable guy and on great terms with all my coworkers, they were more than happy to go along. I went ahead and had one of my black coworkers call up the landlady and ask about her for rent listing and set up a time to meet her and check the place out. I instructed my other black coworker to wait a couple days and do the same, and instructed my white coworker to wait until the end of the week to do the same. A week and a half came and went. During that time, all 3 of my coworkers had met with the landlady to check out the unit. She told my 2 black coworkers that she'd already found another tenant and sent each of them on their way. But when my white coworker showed up later that week, she told him that she hadn't found anyone to rent yet, but that she'd had some unsavory characters show interest. Well, this was more than enough for me. I got in touch with my state's Commission on Human Relations Department. I explained that I had referred a few friends to check the place out, and that the owner of the property was blatantly refusing to rent to minorities. I also called up the NAACP and explained the situation to them. It's now been about 2 months since all of that happened. I checked back with the NAACP this morning to ask for an update on the situation. Racist landlady was slapped with a fine and is currently being sued by the NAACP for tens of thousands of dollars. Operation Duplex Destruction is a success. This revenge was expertly executed. I mean, come on, get the evidence, give it to the various government agencies, sit back and watch the professionals get revenge for you. What else could be better? Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our second story today was also posted by a now deleted account. Revenge on cheating wife, now ex, as well as the karma that came afterwards. Let's jump right in. So, I am in the army and I was married. I was approaching my first deployment to Iraq. It was very stressful and it had my wife wanting me to find a way to stay and not deploy. Obvious things any wife would try to talk about. Anyways, so we have no kids, but both want them, so we talk about getting out of debt while I'm gone. She talks to her best friend back home in another state where we are both from. Her friend agrees to let her move in and charge a modest $300 in rent so that we can get out of debt and start a family when I come back. A plan I was actually very pleased with. I deploy, she is there crying her eyes out saying she will miss me and loves me and we will start a family when we get back. Fast forward 2 months, she starts acting distant, not wanting to talk much on our scheduled calls or text back 1 or 2 word answers. We've been together 6 years. She is never at a loss for words. Anyway, one day she says, I need some space. She asks someone who is 10,000 miles away for space. I ask why. She says she just needs space. She wants to find herself. So I remember back when we lived at home, she had a guy who was always being borderline inappropriate. I'm not a very jealous person and I trust her. So I start seeing said guy in basically all her pictures she posts with the group. Every time he is in the picture, everyone else changes but never him. So for the first time, I'm very jealous and uneasy about everything. So I clone her phone so I receive every text she receives as well as every text she sends. I'll never forget the first text I saw after cloning her phone. Hey babe, I'll see you after work. Want me to save you any of my leftovers? From her to him, it destroyed me. I lost 35 pounds in a week. I didn't eat or sleep. I stared at the phone watching every conversation, watching them talk about trying to have a baby. It was literally everything a married person fears. I ask her if she's seeing someone and she says no she isn't. She is taking care of herself and she loves me, blah blah. I don't say anything about receiving her text for 2 months. Over this time, she finally admits cheating and that he is so much better than me at sex, treating her right, and he does what she wants. During this time, she pays our debt off, gets tattoos with him, matching I love you tattoos, goes to shows with him, buying clothes, etc. with the money I'm making. So this is where revenge starts. I put a freeze on the account for a month. In that time, I change every password to every account to things she won't guess. Army jargon, slang terms. I block her on Facebook and my phone so she has no way to contact me. She lost her car to repo a few months later, got kicked out of her place, had to sell her prized shoes and purses just to stay alive. I then find out she had got a job at her old restaurant. So I post all the text conversations I have with her and the guy talking about having babies that have timestamps on it as well as post conversations we had with the matching timestamps showing all of our friends what she has done. I then have friends call and complain at her job constantly on both him and her. They work at a restaurant, so I also have friends dine and dash. They both get fired. So she tries to call my command and tell them that I am abandoning her and she can't provide for herself. My commander knows what is going on. He does nothing because he had something similar happen. Then, about a month before I come back, she calls me from another number to tell me she is pregnant with his kid. Mind you, I'm still gone, so we cannot get divorced yet. She moved away with him 10 hours from me. April 24th, 2018. She calls me 5 months pregnant, crying uncontrollably, asks me where she should go. Apparently, they have a giant blow-up fight. She tells him she is leaving. She says she doesn't know where to go, and I simply say, sorry, not my problem anymore. Fast forward January of this year, she calls me from a mutual friend's phone. He hit me, I don't know what to do. Maybe you don't cheat on your husband when he is deployed for some guy who talks a big game. Well, I guess you are happy about this? No, but I'm glad I know I'm not the bad guy in this story. And then the next month, he's cheating on me with 2 girls. I'm sorry. I regret everything I did. I effed it all up. Yeah, you did. All in all, this woman destroyed my life, put me into a deep depression I'm still dealing with. But I do feel a little better having proof that I wasn't the problem. To think if this happened even 10 or 5 years ago, I would have come back to an empty bank account, an empty house, as well as seeing my then wife pregnant with another man's baby. She actually hit me up yesterday to ask for some money to help cover rent. So they split up, she had a baby with somebody else, and then she still asked you for rent money? I hope the answer was just complete silence, or even laughter, because it's a joke, right? Our next story today comes to us from Deadly Gerbil. Bad landlord scams his tenants, goes to jail. Let's jump right in. Many years ago, when I worked for a rent-to-own company in a small town, there was a little apartment complex which we made frequent deliveries to, and just as frequently had to repo from. It had been a motel when it was built, and the owner turned it into apartments by just making doorways in the walls between rooms, putting a kitchen and a living room in one and a bedroom in the other. The place was very run down and apparently pretty inexpensive, and based on a few things customers said, it seemed that the majority of the tenants moved in there for short times. I figured it was because they were waiting for prefab houses to be financed and delivered, since the vast majority of housing in that town was mobile homes. Turns out I was wrong, but more on that later. Between deliveries and pickups, we were visiting this place multiple times per month, but the landlord wouldn't let us park the truck in the parking lot to do it. It was a motel parking lot, so there was way more space than the tenants needed, and plenty of room for our truck. But the minute we pulled into the lot, the landlord would come running out of the office and yell at us to get the truck off of his property. We were still allowed to deliver and such, we just had to carry the couches and old-style rear projection big screen TVs across the gravel lot from a truck parked on the street. It was more than a little annoying. Then the day came that I was visiting some customers, a young couple, to have them sign an extension because they couldn't make their payment, and I saw an eviction notice on their door. I knocked, they answered, and then they, too, saw the notice. They explained that they needed the extension because they were behind on rent, but the eviction was unexpected because they were only 2 days late. The notice gave them 1 week to move out. They signed the extension and I left. A little suspicious because that didn't seem right to me. A few days later, I got a call from the couple saying they needed to return the stuff they'd rented because they were being evicted and had to move to a motel. I told them to wait there, I'd be over in an hour. My wife had worked in the rental office of our previous apartment complex, so I knew some tenant laws. When I checked after getting the extension signed, I found that evictions couldn't be served with only a week notice. They had to give 30 days for the tenants to pay or move out. If they moved out, the landlord could take any unpaid rent out of their security deposit. This was a small town with lots of mobile homes, so I'm guessing the law was to prevent people being evicted from rented land on which they had a mobile home they owned, but it applied to apartments too. Normally, I'd have considered this none of my business, but everyone in our store hated that landlord and wanted to get back at him. So I printed out the applicable rental law pages from the town's website and drove over to the apartment complex. There, I knocked on the door of every one of our customers living there, which was about half of the 20 or so apartments, and gave them a copy of the law. While doing this, I learned that the landlord had been evicting people like that for being even a day late, then keeping their deposits, citing the very law I was giving to my customers, just not the part about 30 days leeway. He charged rent in advance. You paid for the next month at the end of each month. So people were losing their deposits over being 1 day late. On top of that, the landlord wouldn't accept late payments, even if they were before his scheduled eviction time, because he made more money by evicting people and moving someone new in, since he kept all their deposits. I told the couple that had started all this that if I were them, I wouldn't move out, and I'd contact a lawyer or at least the city housing department and file a complaint. They were worried because the landlord had said he'd have the sheriff's department evict them if they didn't move out in time. There were no local police, small town, but I said that even if the landlord called them, I doubted they'd actually evict them if they cited the law. That was about all I could do, and I hoped it'd be enough. It was. The couple came in a few weeks later to pay for their rental furniture and to thank me for all of my help, telling me the landlord had just been arrested. They'd filed a complaint, and when the landlord called the sheriff to evict them, it had kicked off an investigation. I never learned what exactly the charges were or what happened to the landlord, but the complex ended up under new ownership, and the new manager had no problem with us parking on their property for deliveries. Also, the number of our repos and deliveries there suddenly dropped because people were no longer being evicted constantly. Between that experience and other stories I've read online, I never cease to be baffled and annoyed that people don't know their rights as tenants. Check your laws, don't take a landlord's word for anything, and stand up for yourself. If people would take some time to educate themselves a little bit more on things like tenant laws, there would be a lot less problems with landlords like this in the future. Your best defense is a good offense, and you can't put up a good offense unless you know what you're talking about. So I implore you, if you're somebody who is renting right now, make sure you check out what your tenant laws are in your particular area. You never know when you might need them, or you might even be getting screwed now and just not know it. I quickly forgot her name, but I always refer to her by the nickname I gave her, Crotchrot. Well, after a few minutes of... Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.